our speakers today. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is Paul Gellerstedt. Paul works as the Cooperative Fire All Hazard and Prevention Program Manager for the USDA Forest Service Southern Region. He previously worked at the Southern Area Coordination Center and before that for the North Carolina Forest Service. Following Paul, our second speaker is Terry Jenkins. Terry Jenkins is the Fire Management Specialist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. Terry started with the USDA Forest Service, serving 13 years, and has spent the last 20 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Terry has served in various roles, including recreation technician, collateral duty law enforcement officer, resource manager, FMO, and now serves as a fire management specialist or fire planner. So Paul, I'm going to hand over the reins to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can begin sharing yours and we'll get started.
Okay. Should see it in just a second here. All right, Holly, you see the intro slide there?
I do.
All right, very good. Well, good morning, everybody. Appreciate everybody joining in this morning. Seeing a long list of names and a lot that I recognize over there on the right, and excited to have everybody with us this morning. And definitely thank you to Holly and all the sponsors for making the webinar happen. Any chance we can have to promote fire prevention, fire education is certainly appreciated. As mentioned, my name is Paul Gellerstedt. I'm the Cooperative Fire All Hazard and Prevention Program Manager, and that's a mouthful, but we're going to focus on the prevention part today. I work at U.S. Forest Service Region 8 office in Atlanta, and for those who aren't familiar with how the Forest Service is organized in the South, Region 8 covers the 13 southern states from Texas and Oklahoma and west, and from Virginia on down to Florida in the eastern part of the area. So what I'm going to do this morning is just give a very quick review of the historic 2016 fall fire season that we had in the southern Appalachians and surrounding areas, and just talk about some of the thought processes we went through in deciding to go with a wide-scale coordinated fire prevention effort. And after my intro of this topic, Terry Jenkins is going to dive into with greater detail about fire prevention and education teams, exactly what they are, what they do, and what she did as the prevention team leader at our coordination center this fall, and coordinating the effort between all the teams out in the field. So just some highlights from the fall fire season here in the South. From October through early December, we had about 12,000 fires and consuming around 400,000 acres in the southern area. Now, 400,000 acres could be a lot or a little depending on where you are, but certainly given the areas that a lot of these fires were in, and the difficulty with the wildland urban interface and so forth, that was a challenging 400,000 acres. Certainly anybody involved in the effort would back that up. So during that time, we had a preparedness level in the southern area of 5 for about 27 days, starting on November 7th. PL5 is the highest preparedness level that you can reach in the southern area or in the country. So that it tells you something about where we were. We haven't been there for a while in the fall, certainly. And throughout the fall, nearly 90 20-person hand crews were deployed, and 80 aviation assets were deployed. We had Type 1 and Type 2 incident management teams that spent a combined total of 151 days assigned to incidents in the region. And over a span of 39 days in the fall, mostly November, there were around 5,000 ground and aviation resources activated through ROS, which is the Resource Ordering and Status System, and estimated that there were maybe another 5,000 that were used on fires that were not MROS, and I could say it may have been well higher than that, though it's hard to tell. So a big effort, no doubt. This was a pretty historic season for us in the South. So what you're seeing there is just a snapshot from November 10th, a satellite image showing the smoke from various wildfires from Alabama, Georgia, up through Virginia and Kentucky, up and down the apps, and you could see somewhat the extent of in what the firefighters were dealing with and what the teams were dealing with on the ground. Definitely a severe season, so not just fire wasn't the only problem, smoke was a big issue too, and so we had everyone had their hands full. Just a couple of shots here, kind of showing the challenging terrain that a lot of these fires were in, and also the wildland urban interface that everyone was dealing with. Very isolated interface here with the house there near Lake Lure, North Carolina, and in a lot of places intermix and other types of interface as well. This is the Party Rock fire in North Carolina, as mentioned at Lake Lure. So you can see you've got the complexity of terrain, you've got wildland urban interface, and you'll notice the fall colors there in the bottom photograph with the lake in the foreground. So you got leaf peeper time of year as well. So that adds complexity, another layer of complexity to already difficult conditions that the firefighters were facing. You get a lot of tourists and a lot of people in the area. Certainly a lot of people concerned with the fire, the safety concerns, and the smoke as well, which impacts people's view and their quality of life. Very, very important. And then at the end of November, very sadly, right before we had a lot of good rain come through, there was the major wind event that resulted in the devastating fires around Gatlinburg. And I won't go deeply into that, but I'm sure everybody's familiar through news sources and otherwise that that was a horrific event that occurred there, and very, very unfortunate. We don't want those kind of things to highlight the fire problem that we have, but unfortunately, that does happen from time to time. So how did we get there season-wise, weather-wise? Leading up to the fall seasons, we had mostly wet years in the South for several years prior to 2016. Of course, there were definitely exceptions to that, and we did have fire seasons. We had fires, but we hadn't had a good fall season in quite a while. This is a shot in November from Predictive Services showing the above normal in red significant wildfire potential. So that's where we were in November, and really shows again the extent of that high fire danger. But leading up to that, we hadn't had that severe fall season in quite a while, as mentioned. And really going back to the spring, you can see here this is a shot from the drought monitor, U.S. drought monitor, in March 1st of 2016, really showing no or very little drought in the southeast at that time. So we were in a decent shape. We had pretty regular rains through the winter and the spring. In early spring, and then things started to really turn off. The faucet started to turn off after that. So you can see here on May 10th, some of that D0, D1, and even not quite to D2 drought developing North Georgia, Western North Carolina, East Tennessee, up in through parts of Virginia as well. So that drought's just starting to creep in a little bit. We were past most of our spring fire season at that point, but things setting up for the fall. So this is mid-July, July 18th, and you can see the extent of the drought area has expanded westward, and also things have deepened quite a bit. You've got some D3 areas, which is the extreme drought, showing up there in red in North Georgia, a little bit of Alabama and Tennessee. And then in October, you can see even some D4 exceptional drought showing up here on the Georgia-Alabama border, and that D3 or extreme drought area has expanded quite a bit. So this was October 18th. As noted up there, the Kentucky and Mississippi had put FPETs, or fire prevention education teams, in place around this time or not long after this. So they were thinking about, okay, what are we going to do? We've got suppression going on, and we have a lot of potential. So let's get some resources out there. Also in October, we had another event, a non-fire event. We had Hurricane Matthew come through. Now, Hurricane Matthew came through in early October and swept up the Florida coast and along the coast, Georgia, South Carolina, and eastern North Carolina as well. Brought lots of rain, a lot of flooding to a lot of areas. And what that did from a fire perspective was it really kept the coastal plain and a lot of the Piedmont in these states out of play for fire for quite some time. So that did limit the extent of the drought to really this part of North Georgia up through North Carolina and Virginia, and then west from there. But that eastern part of our GAC, of our geographic area, was really out of play from a fire standpoint for the fall, which I guess was a fortunate result of Hurricane Matthew, if there is such a thing. So at the peak of our preparedness level 5, this is November 22nd, drought monitor shot, really just showing a pretty big extent of either extreme or exceptional drought in the southern Apps, and then also extending way west into Louisiana and even parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas. So you can see that that was a big area, and there was a lot of concern, a whole lot of activity by this time. So this is just kind of a, it's dry wind situation. So this is about a mile from the Southern Area Coordination Center where we were operating from, and SAC is located in Dunwoody, which is just outside of Atlanta, northern suburb. So very suburban area, a lot of concrete, a lot of asphalt, a lot of traffic as well. But you can see there in the middle a couple of, that's not a car on fire. That's the little bit of mulch and grass under the crepe myrtles. And you can see the motorcycle police officers there where they're kicking that fire out with their boots. So, if they're getting involved in the effort, we've got a pretty wide scale event. So that's a shot I had to take as I was driving by there. So to back up a little bit, that brought us through the conditions that got us there. As far as looking at fire prevention and thinking about doing something a little differently, we knew we were probably headed for pretty dry times. Certainly by the time we got to October, we were experiencing activity, but nothing really unusual to that point. As mentioned, in late October or mid-October, Kentucky and Mississippi had ordered fire prevention education teams and had them in place, working to get people thinking about fire prevention, the public and so forth. And then on October 24th, I was on a call with the Southern Area Fire Chiefs, and Fred Turk, who I see is on the call today. Hello, Fred. He mentioned that in 2007, there was a Southern Area-wide coordinated effort, fire prevention effort, during a bad fire season, led by Gwen Bevins, who used to be here in the Southern area and is now the fire prevention branch chief in Washington, D.C. for the Forest Service. And you can see there just a photo from what they did in 2007. One of the things they did was to get some public service announcements recorded, or PSAs, and with various celebrities and so forth. And that's Jeff Foxworthy there at the microphone, and Gwen is on the right. So just wanted to include that for anyone who was involved in that back in 2007. But if Fred suggested that that this happened back in 2007, and that we might want to think about doing something similar as we were headed towards that pretty bad November. So things weren't terrible at this point, but we were getting there. So then Gwen sent me an email 2 days later. She just said, you may want to think about putting a regional team in, and if you to get a lot of consistent messages and awareness about the fall fire season. Just a thought. So Fred and Gwen were on the same team with this, and certainly we were thinking that way here in Region 8 as well. So next step is what are we going to do to get it in place? Or what's it going to look like? So we leaned heavily on what was done in 2007 to get started. It's nice to have a model to start with, even if it was a 9-year-old model at that point. We started looking for qualified people, prevention team leaders, members, public information officers, to get a team going to really coordinate what would be going on around the South. And we wanted to focus getting a GAC FPET, we'll call it Geographic Area Coordination Center, Fire Prevention Education Team, and we wanted to put that in place at SAC here in Atlanta. That way that team could coordinate with the folks at SAC as far as moving resources around and really what some of the strategy is. They had the multi-agency coordinating group at MAC in place there as well to interface with, and a lot of other key players that Terry will go into in her presentation. But we wanted to get that team in at SAC, and November 7th was the date that we could get everyone together to get that started. We had great support here from the Forest Service Region 8 Fire Management to financially support the fire prevention education team out at the coordination center here, and to get 3 initial fire prevention education teams into the field to get things jump started. That was really a key piece in all this. Was you know, if folks weren't ordering or didn't have the financial ability to order these, let's get some teams out there to start getting the prevention message amped up. So we had to develop a delegation of authority, and Terry will go more into that, and I'll show you a little bit more of that as well, and an in-briefing document for the FPET that was going to be working at SAC. This wasn't just throw a team together and just see what happens. We wanted to make sure that the leader's intent on this was clear, and so we could have as good of a experience as possible. So not expecting anyone to be able to read what's on the screen there, but that is just a copy of the first page of the delegation of authority that was given to Terry Jenkins. You may be able to see that, who is going to follow me up here, as the fire prevention education team leader. Just want to highlight some key stuff that's in this delegation of authority document. One of the main things says here, coordinate team efforts with the Forest Service, with the state fire chiefs, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, BIA, and other agencies, etc. The point of that is this was to be and was a true interagency effort. This wasn't the Forest Service thing. This wasn't the fish thing. It wasn't the state thing. This was between everybody working together. Certainly fires don't really know any boundaries. Fire prevention doesn't or should not know any boundaries either. So we wanted to coordinate a message that didn't step on anybody's toes, certainly, and certainly where everybody could contribute to the messages that we're getting out there. Another one of the little bullets in the delegation: provide advice and counsel to fire prevention education teams and other prevention personnel working in the southern area. Assisting these teams as needed in the development of specific fire prevention materials, and these included things like social media posts, things that were ready to go, and Terry will talk a little bit about that, a little more about that as well. And then another one of the main things was to develop a region-wide communication strategy, so the messaging is consistent, so everybody was on the same page as much as was possible in a broad area effort. So my last slide here will be just the overall strategy here. Just ensure all prevention teams working within the southern area are achieving the same mission and are not duplicating efforts. So to really get some synergy out of everybody's work. The overall goal is for our team to set up a mechanism for all southern prevention teams to collectively increase the drought and fire prevention message across the South. And you know, I've mentioned that several times. We didn't want everybody to be working in their own bubble. We wanted to try to get teams that were out there communicating between each other and with the team, fire prevention team at SAC, and also with incident management teams and with folks doing initial attack and other suppression work on the ground. So we could really come up with one way for everybody to share that information and have one message as much as possible. And with that, I will I very much appreciate your attention. Just a brief intro of what the fall fire season was and what kind of led up to the prevention effort. And I will hand it over to Terry Jenkins. As mentioned before, any of the Q&A will be at the end of Terry's presentation, and we'll take some time to do that. And Terry, as mentioned, was the prevention team leader for the fire prevention and education team that worked out of the Southern Area Coordination Center. So she can tell you a lot of the details about what they did as a team, how they coordinated with the prevention teams that were working in various states and out in the field. So thank you again. I appreciate this, and I will stop sharing and hand it over to Terry.
Good morning, everybody. There we go. Holly, can you see that?
I can. I think you're good to go.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. And thank you to everyone who's taking some time out of their day to listen to what occurred last fall. We're always happy to spread the word about fire prevention and education teams. I think in particular that these types of teams are underutilized in many respects, and we always appreciate the opportunity to get out and do some work and hopefully have some success. I think we did last year, and there was a lot of folks that should take credit and some pride in what they did for that. So here we go. Before we get into exactly what the prevention education team did at SAC and out the field, I'd like for people to think just real quickly, those of you who may not be familiar with prevention and education teams, you know, what they are, how they work, and why we use them. I guess if you get at the very root issue, one of the best things to do is follow the money. Most of the recent research that we have, Prestman research in particular, and some others indicates that for every dollar that we spend on prevention, $30 to $35 are saved in suppression. In my book, anything that we can do that saves money like that is a worthwhile effort. And why do we use these prevention education teams? Well, the root issue there is humans. We start fires. We cause fires, sometimes intentionally or inadvertently. And we build homes in the ways of fire. We try to put out fires that we should sometimes let burn, and we don't use natural fire to our benefit. So it all comes back to people. We're the cause that so many fires occur, and how can we use these teams then? We have to provide effective prevention and communication. We've got to outreach to people, go to where they're at, and that's changing a whole lot from the way that we used to do things just a few years ago. You might not think of fire education and prevention teams as being part of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, but they are. The two bullets that you see there, rigorous wildfire prevention programs are supported across all jurisdictions. Well, that's a direct quote from the Fire Management National Cohesive Strategy. It's something that we need to promote even more in the future. And I like to think that the prevention education teams are a part of that, especially in the collaborative planning phase, where we plan for things to try to prevent the occurrence of fire in the future. And it takes, to use a phrase I think that the Forest Service is fond of, all hands on all lands. It's something that we have to work together on to be effective and to have an impact to reduce the occurrence of unwanted wildfire. Okay, so you get a call. If you're a prevention education team member or leader or PIO person, they pick up the phone, the host agency tells you, hey, we're thinking about getting a team come here and give us a hand. We're having a high occurrence of fires. Can you come over and do some work for us? And you go, sure. So what happens next is you get a delegation of authority. Some people may not be aware that the delegation of authority is issued just like that of any other incident management team would get. Your priorities are based on that delegation of authority. Normally, when we work as an FPET, you work for a single unit or sometimes multiple units. A lot of times they're in severity status, where you are trying to prevent fires before they occur. But FPETs can also be ordered and work with and augment incident management teams on ongoing fires. In those particular cases, you may answer as a team leader directly to the IC or deputy, or perhaps it's been delegated to the public information officer of that team. But those are two primary ways that teams do get ordered up and utilized. In our particular case, we had a very large geographic area and we had a lot of clients. Anything that we did that worked from out of the region, a large part of that success should go to the boots on the ground, those FPETs out in the field that really made things happen. Okay, so Paul covered this pretty much already. We had a lot of things that we needed to do in our delegation of authority, and everyone knows that as coordination efforts go, the more people that you have in the kitchen to cook with, the more confusing it can be, and sometimes that was our case as well. But we had a lot of folks that were doing a lot of good jobs, and they were all participating, so we needed to be partners with everyone. We needed to provide also advice to the teams out in the field. As you're going to see shortly, prevention education teams are pretty small entities, and they have a whole lot of stuff to get done in a very short amount of time. And due to that, these teams are very mobile, they're very independent, and sometimes that independence popped up, especially as we were trying to coordinate efforts. It wasn't a bad thing, it's just that people generally reverted to what they normally do. They don't have normally an umbrella to work under, say, out of the GAC like we did. They generally have to go and do most of these things themselves. The region-wide communication strategy. Once it comes back to it, the hardest thing to do and the most important thing to do is always be consistent with your communication. And with so many different players, that proved one of our biggest challenges. But I hope, and judging by what you can say about our efforts and what we hope we did, we think we were successful. Okay, our strategy again. Set up a mechanism for all Southern prevention teams to collectively increase drought and fire prevention message across the Southern area. Okay, again, you get the call. The first few days, you get everybody together. The team comes in, they get in-briefed. You in-brief the incoming team members. You look at what the communication plan and strategy is. You see where the need is out into the field. Again, Paul had already mentioned that a couple of states had already been proactive by setting up their own prevention and education team members. And so what we did then was look at the fire occurrence and the need based on what was occurring. And with the leadership provided there from Region 8 Fire and Aviation Management, with the Forest Service, targeted areas were selected to place some of these teams that the region was going to fund. We got members together and made that happen. And I do want to do I'm going to go back for just a second. Did want to talk just a little bit about how we had to try to do our communication on a daily basis. And it was a bit of a challenge, I'm not going to lie, but it was something that was necessary. We had state FPETs in all the lower tier that you see right there: Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, North Carolina, Mississippi. Everybody had a team out in those locales. And we knew that as the FPET there in the GAC, we were going to have pretty much daily and constant communication with the Forest Service Region 8 Communication Group, which was the entity that vetted and approved all of our social media, anything that was produced for regional distribution, talking points, social media posts, all kinds of things like that. Anything that we did that we would have for the teams to utilize had to be vetted through that group. We, of course, work constantly with the Forest Service Fire and Aviation Management Group, primarily Paul and Lex Gabaldo, there at SAC, so that we could have constant feedback that we were doing the right thing, following the logical path, meeting the objectives that were set forth in our delegation of authority. And we also had a lot of interaction with something called a NEMO team, National Incident Management Organization, which was also located there at the GAC to provide oversight and assistance to the MAC group, the Geographic Multi-Agency Coordination Group, that set the priorities for the incidents and the fires throughout the southeast area. And then if you'll notice off to the left there, we also had to have constant and regular communication with the states. The states are always leaders in the state forestry commissions are always leaders in fire prevention and education efforts. They do a tremendous job. They do it much more than we do, as a matter of fact, as federal entities. And we needed to communicate with them to see that we were serving their best interests and needs, and also to get their ideals on things. That's where this really was a truly collective effort that took everyone. Okay, so we got our team together and we came in. SAC is great for a lot of things. It was a little bit crowded during that time. I'm going to show you quickly some folks right here. Katie Corrigan from the National Park Service, who came in and was actually assigned to us and the NEMO team. Annalisa Winter, who was our PIO #1. April Phillips sat in that chair, and we had to give her to the North Carolina team in the field. Cameron Dixon, who was a prevention education team member trainee. And I want to make a plug for trainees real quickly. We had a lot of folks who say that they're interested in helping out in prevention and education. Folks, we need to bring them into the loop and utilize them whenever possible. If we had not had Cameron's expertise, he was our tech guru, then a lot of things that we did would not have happened, would not have been shared easily, and we would not have been as successful. And that's me over in the corner with a phone stuck in my ear, which was generally the way most of my days went. But the other key to our success was Mr. Fred Turk, who worked remotely as a virtual prevention and education team leader from his Virginia office there. Fred's primary charge was to stay in touch with the states, making sure that we did something that they wanted us to do, that we met their concerns, and that they were included in all the decisions about prevention education teams working throughout the South. We could not have been successful at all without Fred's efforts. Okay, that just mentioned, and again, keep in mind for those of you that are not familiar with team structure, normally a prevention team is a very small entity. It consists of a prevention education team leader, a public information officer, and a team member. We had an expanded organization there and definitely needed it. We could have used more people, and we'll get into that a little bit more down the road. We stayed there so long that we got to spend Thanksgiving at the SAC locale. That was interesting. Got to share a turkey dinner with everybody that we were working with. It was very nice, and I want to thank and give a shout out again to everyone who worked throughout the holidays. That was very interesting. Normally, we don't have seasons like that, but we did that year, and it extended past Thanksgiving and well into the Christmas season. So as we rotated out members and got other folks in, we had some folks who came in to help us. Tom McKenzie, who was Public Information Officer, Margot Witt, Public Information Officer, Terry Anderson, Public Information Officer, and Shiloh Mullican from Texas, who was our next prevention team member trainee and who did as equally a good job as Cameron did in doing everything that we needed tech-wise, administrative-wise. Okay, team members there. All right, our challenges, of course, when you have a lot of masters, you have a lot of different things that you're trying to consider. Working with all federal agencies, working with all states and multiple agencies within those states, different layers of state and local government. We knew that we had to develop a common platform to be able to share information. When you have that many entities, it's difficult. Shoot, just as federal agencies, we have a hard time coming up with common means to be able to talk and share information. And in this instance, Google Drive filled that niche for us. We'll show you a screenshot from that in just a minute. Other challenges, funding's always a challenge. And again, Region 8, U.S. Forest Service Fire and Aviation Management took the lead in that, as did some individual forest and many individual state forestry agency to cover the cost of the prevention education teams and the materials sometimes needed for those efforts. Okay, and I've mentioned and alluded to this, and I'm going to mention it again. The competition for resources at that time was extremely challenging. Just about everybody who does prevention and education also has a skill base in suppression. And so we were competing for people who were called out on teams. Many of the folks that we might be able to draw on, we don't have that many fire prevention and education members in the Southeast who are seasonals. We're just not that lucky. We have folks who are committed to fire here and have to fill multiple hats, and when they get snapped up on a suppression assignment, then that means they can't do, unfortunately, they can't do the prevention and education work at that time. So we draw a lot from the West on the seasonals that they have there. And at that time, again, remember, October, November, December, these seasonals are generally not in a pay status. So we had a reduced number of people that we could pull from. And then, of course, the competition with those working during the holidays. You know, some people do have other responsibilities and commitments, and to try to compete with the holiday season was pretty difficult as well. Okay, just a quick screenshot, thanks to Paul for that, by the way, of the Google Drive site that we set up. For those of you that might be interested in taking a look at it, it is still up and available. We can send you a link to show you the materials that are on it. The prevention education team working there out of the GAC organized these materials, set up the folders. We also provided folders and encouraged the teams out in the field to provide their information, and it became a really good one-stop shop area to go to find things. And it was very important that we had a one-stop shop area, especially for the media products, things that people could go to and again already know that they had been vetted and blessed and were good to go. That helped hopefully make those FPETs out in the field, their jobs just a little bit easier. Okay, so what did we do there at SAC? Well, there was lots of daily floor briefings, and those are pretty important actually. They provide you with great situational awareness, and it also provided us a mechanism to share what we were doing with everyone there on the floor. While we were doing that, though, the teams were out in the field. And again, for those of you that are not as familiar with what prevention and education teams do out in the field, I want to give you a real quick overview of what was going on. The teams were out in the field. We were coordinating with them daily, and also some states were so strapped and short of personnel they could not field an entire prevention team, but people like Fred Turk in Virginia, Steve Moore in South Carolina, and some of our friends on BIA lands, they might not be able to field an entire FPET, but they were able to put together an individual or two who could help do some prevention things. And that was very important work that shouldn't be understated. So what's a typical day like for an FPET? And again, I'm talking about folks out in the field right now, these teams, just to give you a sense of what's going on there. Well, basically, you're always on the go. You literally run from one place to another. You're setting up meetings, reaching out to people and groups, providing social media as much as possible to get the big bang for the buck word out. And you continually educate, internal and external. A lot of folks within our own agencies don't really understand what prevention and education teams do. This is a quick collage of pictures of what the FPET did in Alabama. They were able to hit some really big ticket items, which is always important. This was Smokey at the Iron Bowl. And I don't even have to tell you how many people they were able to reach by doing that. Literally hundreds of thousands. We often tried to get screenshots too up at those things on the jumbotrons, so that there was a chance that, you know, that audience of 80 to 100,000 people at that football game would see that and continue on. To spread the word, we might be able to get that jumbotron on a television commercial. Again, force multiplying what occurred. They worked on big ticket items too, with our help in the GAC there, about DOT banners, outreaching to fairs, attending parades. The Georgia team did some traditional and non-traditional stuff. If you notice, right-hand corner, school groups have always been a hallmark of prevention education teams. We outreach to faith-based groups because they are often the social leaders within their communities. The fairs and events, festivals that are held in the fall. Smokey Bear here with a real grizzly there at the Bass Pro Shop. Anytime that you can get in some of the big box stores, you can get a really good bang for your buck with getting the word out. And then again, social media, radio, television with Mark Wiles there. We see his mug in the front. In Kentucky, a lot of the same work occurred there. Again, internal education with other members of the Kentucky Forestry group there, outreach to schools, outreach on television, seeing the holiday season setting up in a shopping mall is a good way to outreach to a lot of people. The Mississippi group, this was the road group, constantly on the go, getting the word out, spreading information, doing a lot of the typical prevention activities, placing no burn banners in fire pits, which is a great way to get the word out to people who are using fire that they should not be doing that. Meeting people out in the field, posting at bulletin boards and trailheads. Our Tennessee group had a unique opportunity. They were able to have a Christmas tree, the National Christmas Tree, come through Tennessee, and they certainly used that opportunity to outreach to people. Spreading the word, developing products, doing, again, big ticket items where a lot of folks can see you at these festivals or events. Outreaching to our partners, that's Jennifer Miss Livy outreaching to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And then North Carolina had its own campaign in many respects. They created their own media star, Dante, the arson dog, banners that would go into the airports. Public meetings are always a big thing and very important. People want to know what's going on when there's fires in the area. They want to know what they can do to help reduce that potential. And that is always a big part of what fire education prevention team does. Bill Swartley down there in the corner. Okay, and then again, those areas and states that could not put together a team but still utilized and put out a lot of information. The billboard there in South Carolina, they had a number of billboards across the state. Products that were developed, things that we utilized in the field. Fred made that banner in the middle there about one careless match. A lot of good work going on even without prevention teams. Of course, again, the big ticket items there at the field. Other products that were developed, the use of DOT banners with consistent messaging across the Southeast. The billboards again, Dante, the star dog, and I'm sorry, but I had to use this picture of Burl Bud and Smokey Bear at Bass Pro Shop. That's an opportunity I could not pass up. and again, you reach a lot of people. Okay, now back at the GAC. While they were busy in the field, we were working on that consistent messaging and providing the upward reporting that had to be done on a daily basis, both to NEMO, both to GAC, both to Region 8 Fire and Aviation Management. We also tried to provide a certain amount of logistical support to the teams in the field, and that included finding them personnel, sometimes lodging, sometimes prevention materials. We did facilitate a daily, and then later on, every other day, FPET call, and there was some good and some bad that came out of that. We'll mention that again. And working out of the GAC, we were able to focus on the force multiplier issues, opportunities, things that we knew that we could use across the entire Southeast that the teams wouldn't have to spend time developing and getting approval for. And some of those big ticket items were these: banners, signs, and messages that were placed in southern airports. We did try to target at least one airport in every affected state, sometimes multiple airports. We used standard ad council messaging for that. It saved a lot of time. It didn't have to be vetted a lot, and the graphics are incredible. Other big ticket items that we worked on there back at the GAC FPET were the electronic overhead DOT banners, and also things like media-ready Facebook post, radio and television, public service announcements, videos, maps, news releases, talking points, anything those teams could utilize out in the field were created there out of our group there working out of the GAC and was made available to the team. And I need to say something about Facebook and new media now too. Our prevention education teams have always had the hallmark of utilizing school groups and Smokey Bear. And we all realize now that times are changing. We have to be more proactive and use different media forms to outreach with in order to remain solvent. We have to be willing to try new and different things. And believe me, the Facebook posts work. They really do. We have some metrics here that we'll share with you in just a second. Other big ticket items: Lamar Outdoor and Clear Channel donated empty billboard space for fire messaging across the South. Again, utilizing ad council already made graphics and messages, so it went fairly quickly. And then we had some special work that was facilitated by our team member, Katie Corrigan. And also we brought in the big gun. Gwen Bevins came down. She's the Forest Service National Wildfire Prevention Program Manager. She came down and worked with NEMO, but also worked with us and provided an opportunity for us to outreach to some big name media folks. I don't have to tell you who that is. Everybody knows it's Dolly Parton. And it was very interesting that we were able to get Dolly to do that, especially considering what happened then just a short time after that there in Gatlinburg and near Pigeon Forge. We could have never done that without help. So thanks again, Katie and Gwen. That was a really good lick for us, and we really appreciate it. Other highlights, okay, the metrics that I was going to tell you about: social media outlets reaching in excess of 50,000 people, over 3.1 million people traveling through the Atlanta and Asheville airports over the holidays were exposed to those PSA messages, those prevention messages. The Jumbotrons utilized at Clemson. I also think it was utilized, I believe it was utilized in Alabama at the Iron Bowl too. And then also Appalachian State University's Turkey Day Classic Parade reaching 40,000 fans. You target these big ticket items to get the word out to as many people as possible. And again, I want to reiterate, one study suggests that every dollar spent, remember, in prevention can save up to $35 in wildfire suppression. If we use that metric, then the estimated savings due to this prevention effort would approach about $11 million. That's a lot of money that I would rather spend on prevention than trying to put a fire out, that's for sure. Okay, the good and the bad of being located at SAC. As we were back there, we had great access to everyone. We had the opportunity to interface and tell them what we were doing and how it fit in with what they were doing. It provided us with an opportunity to actually report to MAC, which had never been done before. The disadvantages, those are things that are common no matter where you're going to go. Space, noise, crowding, sometimes mission creep. The good stuff, we also had an AAR that we did after the event was over. Some of the things that came out of that, Google Docs was good, and we should keep using it. It was good that we got to interface with the MAC group. We want to try to keep that effort going, if at all possible. As much as we can expose prevention education, the more it'll get utilized. Other good, having a state representative, that's critical. And we do believe that this was a good example of the cohesive strategy in action. Other stuff to work on, scheduling of daily events, some good, some bad. Challenges that in overseeing some FPETs, that's because they're so independent and used to working independently. It wasn't anything that was major. It's just doing different business differently, and it took us a little while to get used to that. Talked about filling positions. Communication is always a challenge, even when it's your priority. Other things that we want to do when we do it again, hopefully, is have an extra person there in that GAC to fill in just as the resource coordinator. And finally, and I'm trying to hurry, guys, I'm sorry, I want to say thank you to the teams on the ground. We want to thank all the members of our GAC group who we worked with, and we want to thank Forest Service Fire Aviation Management, especially for funding those teams and us there, and to our support there in the regional office, Paul and Lex. I hope some of you have questions, so I'm going to stop right here.
Hey, Terry, if you can just stop sharing your screen, we'll get to the questions. All right, can everyone see my screen? I guess maybe Terry and Paul, if you could answer.
Yes, we can.
Great, great. Okay, so let's see. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar. We're going to do some Q&A here, and thank you to our speakers as well. Actually, we'll go ahead and do the Q&A, and then I'll close out with some, this additional information that's on the slide that you can see here. Okay, I'm going to go through some questions and comments that we got. Let me start here up at the top. So Stephen A. asked, what is the definition of a ground resource? So that could be either Terry or Paul.
Okay, this is Paul. Yeah, just anything non-aviation. So it could be boots on the ground firefighters, or the IM incident management team folks that support them, the prevention teams that are out there, engines, et cetera. So anything that's not in the air, just sort of a catch-all.
Okay, we got another question that from Jeff that says, what does Paul mean by FPET teams, quote unquote, in the field?
Okay, I think that hopefully Terry clarified that better than I did. But in the field were the fire prevention and education teams that were working out in the states and for the forests and refuges and so forth, i.e., all the FPETs that were not the FPET that was located at the coordination center. So those were the people, as she went through, that were out at the parades and schools and doing the social media posts locally where they were, and getting in front of the news camera and all that type of thing.
Okay. We had another attendee ask, I think they got the acronym not quite right. How far did the fire prevention education team request go out? Was it a Ross request?
It was a Ross request, and it did go out nationwide. And we still had a difficult time reaching members that were qualified to be able to come in. Again, remember, a lot of folks are often equally qualified in suppression, and so some of the folks were already committed to suppression efforts when those requests went out.
Okay. I see that Jean Madden is raising their hand. Jean, if you could type something in the chat box or in the Q&A, then we can try to answer your questions. And you may have, and I just haven't gotten to it. Okay. We had another participant ask, was the EPA at all involved in your fire prevention team effort? I noticed that they were not mentioned in the cross-agency FPET.
No, unfortunately, I'll answer that and Paul jump in here. But no, they were not. The people that we were able to reach were already within that ROS, which is resource ordering and status system. It's the system that we reach out to others to question their availability. At this point in time, we have no cross mechanism to know what people that they have that are qualified to join this effort.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add is not necessarily EPA specifically, but certainly people from lots of different agencies and entities are involved, maybe not as a member of the team, but certainly as resources that are maybe used to help get the word out, through their social media platforms that they have, or websites, or word of mouth, email lists, that type of thing. So there's lots of agencies, and I can't remember I don't think EPA specifically was at the GAC level, but certainly within all the teams working throughout the South, there certainly may have been some contact and some information shared through them, but no, not as a part of the standing team.
Great. Okay. I have a little list of questions here. So did Mississippi have any feedback or interaction with the region after all was said and done, lessons learned, etc.?
Paul, would you take that one? Yeah,
we had, when we solicited stuff for an after action review, we did get some feedback from Mississippi throughout it, from what I remember.
Just so everyone knows, Mississippi was one of the teams that were not funded out of the Forest Service Fire and Aviation Management Group. They decided to fund the teams themselves. They had a slightly different mission approach, which was fine. They got a lot of great work accomplished that way. But in the future, I know that we probably want to work a little bit harder to make sure that we all have a very clear understanding about what the ultimate goal is, and some of the methods to perhaps best reach those goals.
Okay. What was the average turnaround time for the Forest Service to vet draft messages, PSAs, etc.?
It depended upon what it was. Most things we would have an answer the next day. Some things that were a bit more controversial, for instance, the use of the word arson turned out to be quite a topic of discussion. Some states wanted to use the term arson, so others did not want to use it at all. Other entities, not just states, and that took a little bit more of the vetting time to do that. But basically, considering what it was and the fact that we tried to use as much national media and ad council's information as possible, it was reasonable. 1 to 3 days, I think.
Well, I'll just add, Terry, a lot of it with Adam Rondo there, and also Michael when he was there, a lot of it got vetted just right on the spot. If it was very straightforward stuff, it was just,
And
yeah,
that
as Terry
that's
mentioned, with some of the things that were a little bit maybe more sensitive in the wording, it could take a little bit longer. But a lot of things just were right away with him in the room there, which was really helpful.
I agree. It really was. It made it easier.
Okay, we'll move through some of these questions. Let's see, did you collect any information about how much was actually saved, not just an estimate based on a study?
No, we didn't. I wish there was a good, easy way to do that. And if anyone has any great ideas, we're all ears. But that's one of the difficult things is really quantifying that. And I'll mention, of course, it's about a whole lot more than the money. The money is extremely important, but the the life safety, the property concerns, that's a huge thing. You don't necessarily know. You don't easily know the fire that didn't happen and what may have happened as a result of that. And so, that's
It's really hard to prove negatives.
it is. It is.
I think also I can add there's a ripple effect to these efforts, and you can estimate, the reach that you had, or maybe the number of people that you were able to contact, but you have it's difficult to understand how that ripples out and how that may have positive effects. The efforts that you had last year may have positive effects this year as well. And so that is part of that dollar number as well. And it can be really difficult to estimate. I'm just adding to what you said.
Yeah, thanks, Holly.
Yep, thank you. And I think there's going to be a national effort to try to fund some studies that way so that we can get better quantifiable information that way. Hopefully that will occur.
So we had one participant say, "Great job, guys." So I'll answer that.
Thanks.
And then the next one said, "As for your prevention programs, what did you all do to reach a teenage demographic?"
Go ahead, Terry.
Facebook, and other social media outlets. There were some tweets that occurred. Again, they're going to be utilizing a whole lot more of that social media aspect than what us olders, us baby boomers use. We still need to look at opportunities, and there is some work that has been accomplished that way about social media, which a whole program could be presented on at some point in time. But basically, we stuck to the social media for the younger set.
Yeah, and I'll just add that neither Terry nor I, and excuse me, Terry, if I'm misspeaking, but we're not the social media experts, which is why on the team at SAC we did have people who were extremely savvy in that realm, and also in the field, a lot of the teams did as well. So I think that's really important, recognizing your limitations. If you're a team leader, whatever the case may be, to make sure you bring in the right people. But that's a great question: is how do you target all the different potential people who may cause a fire inadvertently or otherwise? We've got the whole age range, and reaching one person one way won't reach another one. So you really, I think, have to have a suite of things that you do to get the word out.
Okay, so the next question that we have here, I'm actually going to just scoot over to the chat box because there's another question here. What was the most effective media in passing on the fire prevention education team's message?
The most effective? Again, I think you have to look at social media. We can do outreach to school groups and to faith-based groups, these large-scale events. And we were very lucky that there were a number of very large-scale events like those football games and things of that nature that occurred, or other events that occurred because of the holiday season. But when you look at that, at what reaches, most of the time you're going to go back to social media.
Well, and I think it's mentioned it's probably the most bang for the buck, and it's not going to reach all people, but if you're looking for something that's pretty easy to do and where you can reach a lot of people, that's a good way. But you are certainly going to miss people, and you need those more traditional outlets just out on the ground with the public. But you know, the tough thing is if you go to one event in one part of one county, you'll reach those people, but how do you reach people 3 counties away if you don't have something like social media? And certainly the traditional television, that type of thing, radio, those things are big too and very important, but those are getting more fragmented, and people are getting their information from lots of sources. So I think you just got to hit a little bit of all of it.
Okay, did you examine how education efforts might have alleviated the confusion in the Tennessee fires?
I think we all ponder that. I don't know that we can offer anything that's actual fact. The things that occurred in Tennessee were so horrific and so fast moving. We would have needed teams to remain in place just in that specific geographic area. And there's so many things involved with that. I don't know, but I often wonder about it. And I'm sure the folks up in Tennessee are going through that same exercise right now.
Yeah, and just as a side note to that, the Dolly Parton PSA that Terry mentioned in her presentation, you can help me on the dates, Terry, but that was recorded and done maybe close to a week before when it was actually released, after all the permissions had been signed and the legal stuff taken care of and all that. Obviously, yep. If we had our wish, it would have happened right after it was recorded, but these are real world issues. If it had been out there a week before the events in Gatlinburg, might it have helped anything? I don't know, other than just a general awareness of what could happen. It's a great question. I don't think there's an easy answer for it by any means.
Okay, there's several questions on here. We're trying to answer all of your questions, everyone, but I don't know if we're about almost 15 minutes over our time, and if everyone can stay on, that's fine. But I may try to combine some of these questions because some of them are similar. There was a question that's basically inquiring about are there going to be any trainings in the near future? If so, how can people participate in the fire prevention education team trainings?
Well, the team trainings are listed on the Southern Area Coordination Center training page when they come available for those both in the region and national. And I know we have been asked to put on a training next year. So there should be some coming up in the South in the fairly near future. Paul, you got anything to add?
No, just that, and you know, they're posted on that nationalfiretraining.net. I may have gotten it wrong there at the end, but on that website as well. And of course, there may, there's times when things are done more locally that may not be on there, but check with your state, or check the Southern Area Coordination Center or the national website, like Terry mentioned.
Is there activity right now? Is there a FPET engaged right now in any of the fires?
Not in the Southeast, nothing right now. Nationally, oh yeah, I would expect so. In the West, somebody may be able to chat in and say for sure.
Yeah, there's been a couple teams that have already deployed, and I'm sure California is using a number of teams right now from within state.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. I think we've kind of addressed that one of these questions. So there's been a lot of questions about the Google account, and is it publicly available? Can some of the participants have access to it? How would you like to address that?
Yeah, it's not publicly available. It's designed for team. Of course, it was originally just used for what happened here in the fall, but if there are prevention team leaders on that would like access, they can email myself or Terry, and we can get you access to it. We don't necessarily want just tons of people on there, because then, number one, they could send emails from that account, and number two, they could delete or add stuff that we don't want going away from that site. But if any of the team leaders need access, or the other regional coordinator, prevention coordinators, just get with us and we can get them that. But unfortunately, we can't just make it public, or we could have issues creep up.
And so who's qualified to become a team member? Like what sort of background or agency would you have to work with if someone were interested?
Paul, do you want to take that?
Traditionally it would be somebody with one of the land management agencies, Forest Service, Fish, State, etc. But one of the things we've talked about lately is getting, potentially folks from cooperative extension involved. I think there are avenues for other people from other agencies. The thing to do in those cases would be to get in contact with your state forestry agency to see if they would be able to sponsor your qualification and go through some of that process and work out how that would work to get in there. Certainly the easiest paths are for people in some of the agencies that we've already mentioned, because they're familiar with the qualification system and Ross and all those types of things. Terry, if you want to talk specifically about member and leader, since you've been doing at this for quite a while,
you know what? I encourage anyone with an interest to become a team member. That's the first step. Again, you don't have to carry a Pulaski or a shovel or be on an engine or work out of a helicopter or anything to contribute to the overall fire effort. And we need folks. We would love to have new folks come in. The class is less than a week long for the prevention team member training. There's some other classes that we would like for you to have eventually. Having a background in fire is helpful, but not essential. And then after you're a team member for a while, then you get a task book issued, and you go through the steps to get signed off on as a prevention team leader. And that also is an NWCG sanctioned course that you go to. Again, just less than a week in totality for the training. But the big thing is that you get started. And again, we encourage anyone with an interest in prevention education to join us. We hope that you'll take the time to call Paul or I, and we will do everything within our ability to get you to the next class.
Okay, I feel like I maybe need to make a call at some point. We still have several questions. Speakers, I don't know if you want to choose one or two to answer so we can close out, or maybe you could, I don't know how we'd answer these over email, but I would like to recommend to those on the webinar still to reach out to Paul and Terry. I have their emails listed here, and they could answer a lot of the questions that we've put in the chat box here or in the Q&A. And I would recommend reaching out to them with further questions, because I think we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar here. Before we answer just a few more questions that Terry and Paul choose, I did want to mention on the slide that we're showing right now, not only is Paul and Terry's contact information listed, but also we have information about the cohesive strategy in the Southeast, and also have links to additional success stories, which are on the website www.southernwildfire.net. If you want to read this full story that we've presented the webinar on today, you can go to the link listed on the page. If you want to learn more about Southern Regional Extension Forestry, we have a link there. If you want to help us out in rating this webinar, or to get your continuing education credits, certificate of participation, please go back to your original screen before you started the webinar, or you can go to this link that's located at the bottom of the page. I'm actually going to put it in the chat box, so just in case someone can't see that link for some reason, I want to make that available. So Paul and Terry, go ahead and just select just a couple more questions, and we'll go ahead and close out at that point.
Okay.
I know there's a lot.
Let's see, there was one in there about at what point in time does the establishment of the FPET occur and who's on call for action? That's an interesting thing. And of course, what we did here was to have one at the geographic area or the regional level was a different thing than what might happen when a particular forest or a state or a combination asks for the help. I don't think there's no single answer for that either. It's looking at the conditions, talking to the fire management personnel, looking at the outlooks, fire danger, etc., and making that decision. There's neither people available to do this stuff around the clock year round, or funding for it, unfortunately. So you got to be smart, and you don't want to. I don't think you want to bring in a prevention team too early, where they eventually it seems like crying wolf, and of course too late doesn't work well either. So maybe a little bit of magic sprinkled in there as well. And who's on call for action? Well, nationally there is an FPET rotation. Terry is one of the National Fire Prevention and Education Team leaders for the southern area, and that rotates around to the different areas or different regions around the country as well. And that's all established within the regions and then around the country too. And then of course locally, you know, folks can, if they have the personnel, can decide, make those decisions when and who they want within their jurisdiction. Terry, what else on that one?
I think you covered that. You know, one of the reasons that we wanted to participate in this webinar is get the word out about prevention and education teams. It's a great resource that we honestly don't utilize enough, in my opinion. And we want to use this as an opportunity to basically advertise what the teams can do. Now, certainly there's limitations, but we want to push these teams to do more. And let's try fighting that fire from a different aspect. So the use of the prevention teams is a way to do that.
And I'll just grab another one here real quick. What were some of the hiccups that you ran into when dealing with the state forestry agencies? I wouldn't say hiccups overall. I think we were tried to be very aware of not stepping on toes, whether it be with the state or with any agencies. And certainly some stepping on toes happened inadvertently. When you try to do anything, those things will happen. But as Terry mentioned before, the states are such a huge leader in the South in prevention, and you know, really do tremendous work. That's our most of the land ownership is private, and the states have the protection responsibility, and in turn the prevention responsibility too. So the states are just, you know, tremendously important in this effort. So not really that many hiccups, certainly not from our perspective, maybe more from the state's perspective, but you know, we have a great appreciation for what they do.
Absolutely. And Fred wrote in and had a comment about that, and he said, you know, from his perspective, it was not always smooth, but that in trying to coordinate the 13 different states, and that occasionally we may have stepped on a toe, but it was inadvertent. And once we would go back to them and explain why we did something, generally things got smoothed out that way. And of course, Fred was the perfect person to do that. But I mean, there's always trying to serve, again, that many masters and please that many people. That may be one lesson that we can take home the next time is, you know, before we do it, talk about doing this with our partners in the states, perhaps more before we actually pull the trigger to do it. Gosh, there's so many questions here.
Yes, there are. I think at this stage, though, I think we should probably go ahead and start closing out the webinar. We're almost a half hour after our time, and I know several people kind of need to maybe even just get on to their lunch if you're in the East Coast time. But I had one participant say that they were unable to click on the link that's down here at the bottom, which is basically how you can rate the webinar and receive your certificate of completion. If you're having any trouble, please just enter which kind of certificate you're looking for, whether it's SAF or Georgia Master Timber Harvester. Type that into the chat box and then provide your email address to me, and we'll try to sort all this out, okay? I'm actually going to click on it now and see if it works. Yeah, and we had one comment in the chat box here, is if there is a lot of interest in this fire prevention education teams, we could host another webinar. And so if you have interest in that, please let us know in the chat box. I apologize we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but just for the sake of time, I think we're probably going to have to close out at this stage. So was there anything that Paul, you or Terry wanted to say in closing?
Just for me, yeah, thank you everybody. This is great to have so many folks interested, and definitely if you're not involved in it and you're interested, encourage you to get involved. But thanks for your time.
Ditto for me.
Okay, and I've put the link in the chat box for getting credits. I'm sorry to interrupt you guys. I just want to make sure this is actually working. It should be at the bottom of the screen. I apologize if people aren't seeing this. And the link does work. If you click on it, the link comes up. So let's see.
Hey, Paul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you again. I really appreciate it. Holly, you as well. Appreciate your patience with this. It is really weird talking to your computer.
I concur.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Again, please put your email address in the chat box if you have any trouble linking, accessing the webinar portal page to get your credits for the webinar. So there may be something wrong with this page. I was having a little trouble. Something comes up, but I don't know if it's what we're actually looking for. So please enter your email address, and we'll try to get that settled out for you. Hey,
Holly, will we be able to go in and try to answer some of these things by text for a little while?
If the people have stayed on, yes.
Okay. I don't know whether to give it an effort or not.
It's up to you. Yeah.
I'm more than happy to try to answer some of the ones that we couldn't get to, but just want to make sure that that opportunity would be there.